Is now in public session. There are no apologies. Oh, I beg your pardon. Deputy Mick Wallace, I presume, is continuing as an apology from the earlier joint committee. The purpose of today's meeting is to consider the revised estimates for 2019, the Justice Group of Votes. I would like to welcome the Minister for Justice and Equality and his officials to the meeting this morning. The proposed format of today's meeting dealing with the estimates is on a vote-by-vote basis. The Minister will begin by making an opening statement and then we will move to the votes and programmes. I will call the individual votes and programmes and we will then open it up to the floor for questions from members of the committee on that subhead. I think I'm right in saying there are 6 in total. Am I right in saying that? Yeah, I am. The Minister will respond to each of the members that I will call in the order in which they indicate, and then we will move to the next vote. But before we begin, I must again remind members of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against either a person outside the House or an official, either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. I would now like to call on the Minister to make his opening statement.
Thank you, Peter. And members, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to present the revised estimate for 2019 in respect of the Justice Vote Group to this committee. I'm joined this morning by officials on my right, Donnacha O'Sullivan and Michael Culhane, on my left by Seamus Clifford, Nuala Ní and Elizabeth Downey in the rear. So the Justice Vote Group is made up of 6 different votes with a combined gross expenditure allocation of €2.77 billion this year, which comprises €2.58 billion in current expenditure and €195 million in capital expenditure. In addition, there is a further capital provision of €7 million in unspent capital from 2018 available for spending in 2019 under the capital carryover provisions. The gross expenditure estimate for the Garda Síochána vote 20 is €1.76 billion, which amounts to 64% of the funding for the entire vote group. The estimate for 2019 is further increased by an additional amount of €3.58 million carried forward from 2018 under the capital carryover provisions. I'm informed by the Garda Commissioner that since the reopening of the Garda College in September 2014, approximately 2,600 recruits have attested as members of Garda Síochána and have been assigned to duties in communities across the country. Reaching a strength of 15,000 will require continued recruitment on a phased basis over the next 3 years. I have to say the Government is committed to reaching this goal, and I'm pleased to say that I've secured funding in Budget 19 for continued intake of 600 Garda trainees this year and significant recruitment of civilians known as Garda staff. I want to acknowledge the importance of the report last year to the Commission on Future Policing. That report has again reiterated the importance of Garda resources being focused on policing duties, has recommended the transfer of many non-policing functions currently carried out by sworn members of Garda Síochána to Garda staff or other agencies with greater responsibility for these areas. There are currently in the region of 2,500 full-time Garda staff undertaking administrative and technical duties within Garda Síochána. I'm determined that this will increase to 20% of the Garda workforce, or 4,000 individuals, by 2021, to bring the composition of the Garda workforce more in line with international norms. The investment in civilian personnel will ensure that trained Gardaí are not engaging in administrative and technical duties which could be done by suitably qualified Garda staff. This will ensure greater visible policing within communities, one of the key recommendations of the Commission's report. But it will also help address critical capacity and skills gaps in the organisation in areas such as corporate support, finance, HR, IR, that are the legacy of the moratorium on recruitment in place during the downturn in our economic fortunes. The Garda Commissioner is responsible for the distribution of newly attested Garda among the various Garda divisions. Newly attested Gardaí have a further 16 months of practical and classroom-based training to complete after their 8 months in Templemore in order to receive their BA in Applied Policing, which is accredited by the University of Limerick. To ensure that they are properly supported and supervised and have opportunities to gain the breadth of policing experience required, policy of the Commissioners to allocate them to designated Garda stations that have appropriate training and development structures in place that include access to a trained Garda tutor and a permanently appointed supervisory sergeant who is thoroughly familiar with their responsibilities under the training programme. I'm particularly pleased that additional funding this year provides for an increase in the supervisory ranks of 190. The number of sergeants will increase by 110 and inspectors by 81. While up to €95 million is available for the overtime budget of Garda Síochána this year, I must emphasise that Garda overtime cannot be considered in isolation in terms of the increase in new Gardaí and the redeployment of Gardaí to frontline policing duties due to the civilisation programme. Over the period of time, this is expected to alleviate pressure on the overtime budget. It's also the case that the unprecedented investment being made in Garda ICT infrastructure, some €342 million between 16 and 21, will enable Garda Síochána to deliver on reform and work more efficiently in delivering professional policing and security services for the community. I fully support the Commissioner in his efforts to ensure that overtime comes in on budget, that it frees up resources for other important areas in the Garda vote, such as, for example, increased training and provision of equipment and other resources. I'm pleased that under the National Development Plan, the overall vision in Project Ireland 2040, the Garda capital allocation has increased from €61 million to €92 million this year, a 50% increase. This will facilitate investment of around €61 million in ICT, which is now an important element in the fight against crime. This substantial investment will provide new and leading-edge technology to support our frontline Gardaí in the daily work that they do across communities. In addition, the budget provides for a further €10 million investment in the transport fleet and €25 million in the Garda building programme, including the capital carryover to which I made reference earlier. The building programme is an ambitious 5-year programme based on agreed Garda priorities, which continues to benefit over 30 locations around the country, underpinned by significant exchequer funding across the Garda and OPW votes. In addition to that programme, other major works to the Garda estate which are ongoing include pilot Garda station reopening project, the development of a new facility at Military Road, the major refurbishment of Fitzgibbon Street Station here in Dublin. The programme also includes a PPP project to deliver much-needed new Garda stations in Macroom, in Clonmel, in Sligo, as well as a new custody suite at the Garda station located on Anglesey Street in Cork. I wish to emphasise that the clear goal of this investment is to address deficiencies in the Garda estate, provide fit-for-purpose facilities for Garda members and staff, as well as the public interacting with them. There's been some good progress in relation to the Garda estate in recent times, including in particular the completion and entry into operational use last year of 3 new divisional regional headquarters in Wexford and Galway and Kevin Street, Dublin, which collectively required funding of in excess of €100 million. I'm pleased that the process of implementing the Commission on the Future Policing report is already underway and well underway. Funding of €10 million is provided in 19 for the Justice and Policing Transformation Programmes to support ongoing reforms. At the Justice and Equality vote, Caoimhghín vote 24 has a gross estimate provision of over €501 million, broken down into 5 separate programmes comprising almost 60 separate subheads. There's an additional €0.94 million in unspent capital available from last year. I'm pleased that substantial funding has been made available to agencies who play such an important role in the criminal justice area, such as the Forensic Science Ireland and the Criminal Assets Bureau. A total budget of in excess of €30 million is being provided to Forensic Science Ireland this year, of which €18.5 million is capital. Additional funding is in response to the increased workload of FSI, combined with the complexity of cases. Over €2 million in additional current expenditure has been provided to enable new staff recruitment and cover certain non-pay costs. A total capital funding to the order of €18.5 million has been provided for the multi-year capital project, which will provide Forensic Science Ireland with the much-needed facility to carry out its crucial role in the criminal justice sector. While certain site preparation works have been carried out to date, the procurement process for the construction of the new laboratory, which has been carried out by the OPW on behalf of the Department of Justice, is due to conclude shortly. A further €0.7 million has been provided for the Criminal Assets Bureau, compared with the corresponding budget last year. To fund additional staffing resources assigned to the Bureau, this brings the total budget for Criminal Assets Bureau to €8.6 million for this year. Members will be aware here that the CAB plays a crucial role in tackling money laundering, targeting the proceeds of crime all over Ireland. Criminal Assets Bureau is working to ensure that criminals cannot enjoy the spoils of their illegal activities. The increased resources will support the Criminal Assets Bureau in this vital and important work. Additional funding of over €1.5 million has been made available to the Probation and Irish Youth Justice Services this year. The total budget for these areas in 2019 is just under €61 million. The additional funding provided to the Probation Service includes €500,000 for the implementation of a Housing First project being undertaken in conjunction with the Irish Prison Service for the provision of accommodation and support for up to 75 heart-to-house prisoners. The additional funding for the Irish Youth Justice Service of €500,000 will enable additional initiatives to be undertaken to divert young people at risk away from crime and away from antisocial behaviour. Some of further additional funding to the order of €3.6 million is being provided for the Data Protection Commission, bringing the total budget to €15.3 million. This office has received additional resourcing in recent years to build the organisation's capacity and its capability in preparation for the enhanced regulatory powers of the Commission and more prominent international role under GDPR. These increased resources have facilitated the recruitment of additional staff, including legal, technical, audit and investigation specialists, as well as policy and administrative staff. The increased funding fully reflects the importance of a stable and effective data protection regulatory environment in relation to the personal data of individuals, but also in relation to the broader economy and in particular the continued expansion and growth of the digital technology sector. It is also possible to provide additional funding of over €1.6 million to the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission, including a reprofiling of existing budget and the provision of new additional funding, bringing the total budget now to €10.7 million. This will enable additional staff to be recruited in respect of its investigative and administrative functions, and to further expand the unit established to deal with protected disclosures. Additional funding has been provided across a number of equality areas, including gender equality, €1.9 million, total budget €5.1 million. Traveller and Roma initiatives, €0.5 million, total budget €3.9 million. Migration and Integration Fund, €1 million, total budget €2.5 million. LGBTI equality measures, €0.2 million. Indeed, this funding will assist in continuing to progress our national equality strategies for traveller and Roma inclusion, the National Strategy for Women and Girls, the Migrant Integration Strategy. It also allowed the state to derive maximum benefit from European Union matching funding available for European Social Fund projects. I'm pleased also that much progress is being made in the restructuring of the Department of Justice. As recommended by the Effectiveness and Renewal Group, the Department has now been realigned under two pillars, each headed up by a Deputy Secretary. The two executive pillars, on the one hand civil justice and equality, on the other criminal justice, will be supported by a central corporate pillar. A new corporate governance structure reflecting this realignment came into operation earlier this year in January. The Effectiveness and Renewal Group also recommended that the Department should design and implement a new operating model based on 5 functional units, each focused on specific areas of activity: operations, policy, transparency, governance and legislation. The Department established a transformation programme to implement the new operating model. The Department has completed the high-level design of the new operating model at the end of March and has now moved on to the details of that design. The programme is on schedule, due for completion by October of this year. I'm pleased that the recent periodic reports that I have received from the Effectiveness and Renewal Group have noted the substantial progress being made by the Department, which is consistent with the Group's recommendations. Turning briefly at Caoimhghín to Prisons Vote 21, the gross estimate in 2019 is €359 million. The additional current expenditure of almost €10 million compared with the corresponding budget last year includes €7 million in respect of additional payroll costs and to recruit both prison and administrative staff to enhance delivery of services and the implementation of updated business processes throughout the prison service. The capital budget of prisons is €32.3 million this year, will enable significant progress to be made on the redevelopment of the prison in Limerick, cell sanitation, a dedicated stand-alone new female prison for the Munster region. This project is due for completion next year. A total estimate in gross terms of €138.4 million is being provided for the court services Vote 22, plus an additional €2.5 million unspent capital from last year. The unspent capital will mainly facilitate the continuing expansion of the court service online strategy, which in turn supports the key objective of improved services to the public and, of course, access to justice. The enhanced service include full deployment of e-licensing system to all solicitors across the country and the commencement of the development of e-probate system and electronic sharing of probate information with the revenue commissioners. A gross estimate €3.3 million has been provided for the Policing Authority Vote 41. Gross expenditure budget for the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission Vote 25, €6.75 million, to enable it to continue its important work in promoting and protecting human rights and equality. In conclusion, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions members may have in relation to the varied range of votes which make up the justice sector budget. Thank you.
Mahagat and Tara, I think just in case maybe it might be picked up what you had said in relation to the standalone female prison for the Munster Region Minister. It's not due for completion until 2021.
Yes.
It said
I said next year. Sorry, 2021.
It said next year, 2021.
Thank you, Chair. You're quite right.
Cite a wee bit of
thank you for that.
Earlier expectation. Donnacha O'Leary was the first to indicate, then followed by Deputy Jack Chambers. Please.
Good morning, Dara. And I presume we're doing this head by head, are we?
We're taking at this point the Gardaíocht on vote 20
sure.
only.
Only. Just I was checking. I suppose the first question I have is, if my recollection is correct, there's a reduction of about 3.5 million, I think, in spending on guard overtime. If I think that's correct, Minister. Obviously last year there was, and the previous year, there was overtime bans. In 2017, I think it was just for December, but it was a much lengthier period last year. So, I suppose while I understand that a huge amount is being spent on guard overtime, it is a decision that is generally taken by chief superintendents, and on the basis of the resources available for them, the pressures that are on them to try and get units out there at times that are needed. So the fact that it has been overspent so substantially the last 2 years, and yet not only is it just an attempt to try and stick to last year's budget, which obviously didn't succeed, but there's actually 3.5 million less in the kitty for that. So, that seems to me to be extremely challenging, and I would be concerned that it would have a significant impact on the capacity of the Gardaí to deliver the service available to them. So I'll ask you that question. I have a few more questions, maybe ask them as much as I can altogether. I suppose, just in relation to...
If I could indicate, as there are 6 subheads to the process.
Yes.
it will be a good idea if it's possible to group your questions just in each member. Otherwise, we could be here for quite a lengthy period and unnecessarily.
I suppose just to ask very briefly if there's any intention to expand the Garda Youth Diversion project in this coming year, any new project. Just in addition, it was a PQ from last year, so it may be slightly out of date, but I imagine proportionately it's roughly the same. 111 out of 564 operational Garda stations don't have broadband. I imagine maybe some of that has been tackled, but I doubt all 111 have. So what the department's plans to, and the Gardaí's plans to try and tackle that is. And then I suppose just in relation to the plan to reach 15,000 sworn members by 2021, I think it is. Whether, I suppose, first of all, I suppose I've already stated the view that I think we should perhaps be considering higher than that at this stage. But also to ask the question, how in line are we to reach the targets? That's it. I think it's 2021 for that. And I suppose I take the opportunity just of that to emphasise, like, a trend I'm increasingly recognising is that in areas that have grown rapidly, and I'm sure this is true all over the country, that where previously a station might have had a small complement, but there's been rapid demographic growth in recent years, like in my own area, I could instance Caoimhghín or Douglas, but I'm sure there are parts of Dublin or parts of the commuter belt, some of those smaller stations that would never have been district headquarters or anything like that, like those stations are seriously struggling, I think, with the increased growth in population, and very often a very young population in those areas. So, I think that actually perhaps there needs to be specific attention given to the department and to the Garda Síochána to those locations that have had rapid growth. And if the Minister has plans to tackle that, I believe there is a need for more Garda resources in those areas. If the Minister has plans to tackle that, if he could outline them. I think that's...
Okay.
I think that's up for the minute. All I have on the
on the Garda vote.
Yeah. On the Garda,
Minister, would you please respond to Deputy O'Leary's question?
Thanks, Caoimhghín. Deputy O'Leary raises in the first instance the very important issue of Garda overtime. And of course, deputies will be aware that the management and the allocation of the Garda overtime budget is the responsibility of the Garda Commissioner, but it's an important issue, and it's one that always is the subject matter of debate here in the Parliament, and perhaps rightly so. But there will always be a need for a certain level of overtime. And the sum of €95 million, which is available this year, is by any standard a most significant sum. But I don't think it would be fair, nor do I see it as being a reflection of the facts on the ground, if Garda overtime is taken in isolation. I think Garda overtime must be seen in the context of other resources available to An Garda Síochána, and that's why the importance of the recruitment campaign has a direct bearing on the issue of overtime, because the more Garda numbers we have, the less reliant the overall Garda service will be on the issue of overtime. So I would say that the sum of just under €100 million is an appropriate sum in order to bolster what I say. I'm informed that the total spend on overtime to the end of March, a couple of weeks ago, was €21.8 million, which is on target, and that accords with the overtime profile as established by the Garda Commissioner. But with new Garda numbers, with the existing overtime, we will manage to have a police service with a greatly enhanced number of policing hours throughout the country, and also bearing in mind the ongoing programme of civilinisation, which leads me to the third or fourth question, and that is, yes, that we are on target for the year 2021 to have 15,000 sworn members of An Garda Síochána and 4,000 civilians. Very keen that the state supports the Commissioner, particularly in the civilinisation programme, notwithstanding the challenges that will pose for An Garda Síochána. But it seems to me, as a public representative, and I know this committee recently produced a very fine report in respect of rural crime, and on the matter of Garda Síochána, it seems to me the key is availability and visibility. And that's why the civilinisation programme will allow for the release of more Gardaí to do what I believe they're best trained to do, and that is protect communities from harm on the streets by way of additional numbers. So we are on target for 2021. As far as the youth diversion programme is concerned, an additional €2 million has been provided under the dormant accounts funds. That will involve additional and new investment. As regards the location of these programmes, I don't have them in front of me, but I would be happy to provide details to the Deputy. But Deputy O'Leary will be aware of the importance of the youth diversion programmes around the country, my intention certainly would be that the €2 million available would allow for enhanced programmes and new programmes. As far as the issue of broadband is concerned, in Garda stations, and that is an issue that, again, I know this committee has been very keen to see progress on. There are 565 Garda stations in the state. I have been speaking to my colleague, the Minister with specific responsibility in that regard, Minister Bruton. And yes, I accept that there are variations and fluctuations of the number of sites connected to the Garda network. But I believe that it's important that we engage in projects that will enhance access, particularly in rural Garda stations. And there is a project in that regard. I would also point to the fact that the increased resources in respect of the Garda fleet allows for mobile IT systems contained in Garda cars, which oftentimes is the only means by which there is ICT network connection. But that, again, is important in the context of rural Ireland. And any member attached to a currently unconnected Garda station can nevertheless have access to the pulse system at the local district station. And that's important in ensuring that there is an element of connectivity. But I do accept there is a challenge, and it's a challenge that has been worked upon. Finally and briefly, in respect of the struggling Garda stations, as labelled by Deputy O'Leary, I can say yes. The Garda Síochána at Commissioner and management level, of course, reviews the profile of Garda station in the context of the changing social profile of an area, with particular reference to areas of recent growth by way of house building, and also, for example, in areas where there are seasonal variations. I mentioned Kinsale, in close proximity, if not in the Deputy's own constituency, where during the course of the summer months you will see increased Garda deployment. Similarly, in other resort-type areas. But the Garda state, the profile in respect of numbers and senior figures within Garda stations is kept under review in the context of the needs of policing in each individual area.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Deputy O'Leary. We're moving on to Deputy Jack Chambers, please.
Thanks, Chair. Just on you mentioned civilianisation, Minister, can you give an update about how many Gardaí have been redeployed or deployed on frontline on the basis of mitigating the need for overtime, just an exact figure, and also around what has been your recruitment around civilianisation or redeployment within the public service to meet that change that you referred to. Just in terms of the capital budget, the obviously an increase of 58%. Can you give an update on what the cost of the reopening of Step-Aside is in the context of that budget? And also maybe a breakdown of other rural stations. And then also what's the investment? The Gardaí were positive about mobile phone technology being used, so kind of live data updates, and it was piloted, I think, in Limerick. Is there a commitment to roll that out in the budgetary context here? It's, I think, an important reform within Pulse. The witness activity programme, or the witness security programme, sorry, is up 505%, which is very significant. Does that relate to the present gangland situation, or what? It seems like a very significant rise year on year. Can you provide context for that? Because obviously it's been ongoing for a number of years now. And also, I just wanted to ask about the in relation to the armed support unit. Is there any is there commitment to expand that? Certainly in my own area, we've had significant gangland difficulties, and that relates in many cases to Ireland being seen, in my view, as we are a cell structure for the European transit of drugs, which we know about. And how's the Department of Justice and the Gardaí kind of positively addressing that? We have had some successes, but I think unfortunately it's a drop in the ocean, and there'll be people killed in the crossfire, I think, if we don't see greater deployment of national units. But that we aren't robbing Peter to pay Paul, so we aren't taking from people in the inner city who've had them for West Dublin. I think there needs to be a greater focus on the armed support units and an investment in them, because we have we have people who are shooting others in broad daylight, and they have the audacity to do it. I think we need to ensure there's law and order in that regard. So I just ask that this focus on the armed support unit, or can you provide an update on that? I know this maybe doesn't relate to the Gardaí, but not to the Garda Vote. The cab funding for cab seems to have been reduced year on year. If you look at the budgetary, I will go into that estimate anyway. I'll ask at the time. Yeah, I'll ask.
Chambers. I want to thank the members for the cooperation in grouping their questions, the Minister for noting them and responding to them each as asked. That will help us to get through the business as efficiently as possible. Minister, please.
Thanks, Garda. Just in respect of the civilian staff in Garda Síochána, deployment to date is to the order of 260. This year, however, it's the intention of the Garda Commissioner to redeploy a further 500. Again, he is confident that that will take place in the course of the calendar year. Recruitment in terms of expertise is ongoing, and I point in particular in the area of ICT specialists, financial accounting experts, and also in the area of human resources, in order to ensure that the transformation programme and the various modernisation schemes are on target. In respect of the Garda stations, estimated that the costs in respect of Step-Aside will be something in the region of €1 million. That's part of a bundle of 6, one of which is already open in Dunnard in Wicklow, others on target for opening this year, Ballinspittle in Cork, Bourne in the Caoimhghín Ó Caoláin constituency. Progress being made in respect of Rush in North County Dublin, and Loughlin Bridge in Carlow, again on target for refurbishments to have been completed this year, and stations open. In respect of the handheld technology, there is a further €1.5 million for this purpose, which will see the expansion of the project in Limerick in terms of the automated number plate recognition devices, and again that is working quite satisfactorily. On the matter of the Armed Support Unit, again, the deployment of particular units would be a matter for the Garda Commissioner, but you're right. There is a particular challenge in the inner city area where there is increased activity on the part of a number of units, including the Armed Support Unit. But I would point to the importance of the capital project in that area, which is the Fitzgibbon Street Garda Station, which again is on target in terms of redevelopment and refurbishment. On the matter of the Witness Protection Programme, again, that's at the discretion of the Gardaí in terms of the periodic drawdown of funding. Relatively low spend in 2018, less than €200,000. In 2017, that was in excess of €500,000. But again, we monitor that at the discretion of the Gardaí from time to time.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Deputy Chambers. Deputy Clare Daly was next, please.
One question in this vote, but I think it's incredibly important, and it's the issue of the protective service units and the plans to have one open in every division by the end of the year. I asked you about this the last time you were in, Minister, and you said you hadn't got the answer to hand about the funding for this. Subsequent to that, you wrote to the committee and said there was actually no funding ring fence for this at all because you couldn't quantify it. And, well, sure, look, it would be just absorbed in the general Garda budget now. As far as I'm concerned, this is an enormous problem. If you can't quantify it, it means the plans for actually developing it aren't really that developed at all. We're now a third of the year away of the year in, and we know that issues like, if it's not ring fence, well then overtime or other stuff is likely to gobble it up and it goes bottom. And I just want to put on the record what Jeffrey Shannon told us. And bear in mind now, this is September 2017, when he said one of the key messages to emanate from the almost 100 reports published over the past 20 years is the lack of interagency cooperation. I am hoping this will be the last report in which this issue will have to be highlighted. That was September 2017. Now, these units are absolutely key for child protection and for the victims of sexual and domestic violence, but they seem to be treated as an afterthought. So what I want to know is, why has no budget been allocated to this? And can you give us an update on the rollout, how many have been provided, and how can you stand over the commitment that we'll have one in every Garda division by the end of 2019?
Thank you, Deputy Daly. Minister, please.
Yes, is the answer to that question. This is a priority of mine and one that I engage regularly with Garda management about. Members may be aware of significant progress here as far as these issues are concerned, Caoimhghín. To date, 10 units have been established across 9 Garda divisions. 3 were established last year in terms of West Dublin, Louth and Cork City. A further 6 units were established in January of this year. That's in South Central Dublin, in Waterford, in Kerry, in Carlow-Kilkenny, in Limerick and in Galway. And it is the target and the objective, the stated objective is, and indeed my stated objective is, that all units will be established. Our units will be established in all areas by the end of this year. I recently visited Cork, Cork South West. I would expect progress on that during the course of the late spring, early summer. Gardaí have said that there are a total of 64 Gardaí now assigned to the Garda National Protective Services Bureau. All established units are operating from appropriate and suitable accommodation. There is new equipment in place. There is training. There are appropriate courses in order to ensure the level of expertise is available, particularly in the context of new legislation that this committee had a part in enacting. I mentioned particularly the new Domestic Violence Code and of course the recent ratification of the Istanbul Convention. So I would agree with Deputy Daly as to the urgency as well as the importance of the rollout of the divisional units. The fact that I'm not in a position to put an actual costing tag on each individual unit should not in any way detract from the objective here, or does not in any way indicate that there isn't either a will or a budget, because these will happen, and they are happening progressively across the country. 6 already this year. I expect a few more during the course of the spring and summer, and the stated intention is that every Garda division will have a unit by the end of this year, which is a mere 7 months' time.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Deputy Daly. Deputy Jim O'Callaghan, please.
Thanks, Minister. I have 3 brief questions. The first concerns the Garda Reserve, and the estimate for that is on page 10 of the document you've produced for us. And you'll note that the estimate for 2019 is 1.3 million, and the estimate last year was 250,000, and only 165,000 was used. What is the reason for the Gardaí not spending the money that's allocated to them for the purpose of the Garda Reserve? And I welcome the fact that there is an increase in the estimate this year, but how can you be satisfied that that money is going to be used for the Garda Reserve, unlike in previous years when it wasn't used? That's the first question. Second question concerns civilianisation. I welcome it. You'll be aware, however, that there's some concern about the fact that civilians are being given the role of crime scene investigators. Are you satisfied that the public is getting value for money in respect of that, or do you have a concern that the expertise that Gardaí have should be availed of and should be maintained for the job of crime scene investigation? And the third point is, you may recall 10 days ago, a government minister suggested, or rather stated, that there was a conspiracy within An Garda Síochána to damage members of the government. Obviously, if that was true, it would give rise to a significant damages claim against the state. I note that he subsequently withdrew it, but can you satisfy and assure this committee that there's no substance to that extraordinary allegation? Thanks.
Thank you, Deputy O'Callaghan. Minister, please.
I can very much so assure this committee, Caoimhghín, that there was absolutely no foundation in the comments of Minister State Finian McGrath. In fact, he said as much himself when he withdrew his comments in their entirety. And in fact, I was in agreement with the public commentary of Deputy O'Caoláin and indeed other members of this committee. We enact legislation here as a collective in the Oireachtas. And of course, it's incumbent on all appropriate agencies of the state, but in particular on Garda Síochána, to ensure the enforcement of legislation. Any suggestion otherwise would be unacceptable. As far as the Garda Reserve is concerned, there are a number of issues that haven't been dealt with in a way that perhaps some members of this committee might have expected. And that is the future of the Garda Reserve, or indeed the current operation of the Garda Reserve. There is a strategic review underway on Garda Reserve. I want to point out what the Commission of Future Policing report said in respect of the Garda Reserve, and that is that the recruitment to the reserve, or the expansion and further development of the reserve, might be paused until such time as we'd have a look at this review, and then we would actually implement the strategy in accordance with the commitments. I would hope that that could be done at an early date. We have set targets in respect of the Garda Reserve and numbers. 100 Garda Reserves commenced training in very recent times. I welcome that, but I would hope we would be in a position to roll out an enhanced future or blueprint for the Garda Reserve, which would see them working hand in hand with members of An Garda Síochána at various public events, in particular sporting and cultural events and festivals throughout the summer, and also perhaps in the area of traffic. but I would agree that we need to ensure that the strategic review is completed and then that there is will on the part of everyone in order to ensure an implementation. As far as the civilisation is concerned, and again, I would advise members that we shouldn't underestimate the task involved here in terms of introducing new work practices within An Garda Síochána and also ensuring that there is a recruitment of specialist expertise from outside what would be the sworn Garda complement. And I think this is very important in the context of the modernisation of the Garda service. Yes, it's important that there be value for money, but I see that happening in terms of, for example, financial expertise, human resource expertise, indeed corporate government or corporate governance expertise in An Garda Síochána. The aim being that there will be a significant complement of expertise entering the Garda service and also freeing up and redeploying people who haven't been engaged, who are members of An Garda Síochána to a frontline duty and their work on an administrative level would be undertaken by Garda support staff who would not be members of An Garda Síochána.
Tara, that completes address of vote 20 on Garda Síochána. I'm now proposing that we address vote 21 prisons, and I invite questions from members on this vote in whatever way you wish to indicate. I'm not holding to the same listing. Members may or may not wish to engage on specific votes, so it's a new opportunity on every occasion. If anyone wishes, Deputy Clare Daly, and followed by Deputy Jack Chambers.
Just two brief areas really in this one, and one is the, I suppose, well-aired problems about those suffering from mental health problems in our prison service. Now, I know the Minister can maybe clarify who pays for this end. I know the obviously new Director General told the PAC in January about the difficulty in getting forensic mental health staff, psychiatrists, into the prison service. It was sanctioned previously by the HSE, but posts haven't been filled, and we know this puts a huge pressure on staff and obviously on prisoners themselves as well, who really need to be transferred to the Central Mental Hospital or whatever. So the big disruptive influence, if you like, in the prison service. So I suppose I'm wondering is, what's the difficulty with staffing? Has that been addressed? Is there any particular schemes to improve the situation regarding medical and health care, particularly mental health care, for our prisoners in this budget? And the other thing is in relation to solitary confinement, and obviously the House supported my bill to end solitary confinement, and we would note that, you know, there's still hundreds of prisoners across the state spending 21 hours a day in the cell. So I'm wondering, has any of the budget, the funding here, been invested to address and put in place the resources that enable people to leave their cells more, particularly prisoners on restricted regimes for their own protection under Rule 63? To change that, it obviously requires investment. It does mean more staff and better infrastructure. So could the Minister tell us a little bit more about what's been happening in that regard? Has the necessary investment been put in there?
Thank you, Deputy Daly. Minister, please.
Well, more staff and better infrastructure. I would point to ongoing improvements since last we considered the prison vote estimate. For example, in Portlaoise Prison, the introduction of the new unit for especially violent prisoners, and also dealing with the area of solitary confinement in order to ensure that persons who are under a solitary regime have an appropriate level of treatment and are engaged on a solitary level for good and sound reasons. I also add to the infrastructural developments the recruitment of new prison staff, which is ongoing at present. I readily accept what Deputy Daly has said in respect of medical care and attention in prison, and particularly mental health needs poses a challenge. In that regard, the Irish Prison Service is making arrangements for a comprehensive healthcare needs assessment of the prison population. Need to ensure that anybody in prison who requires medical treatment, that such is afforded to them. Prisoners receive care through the primary care system. Yes, there is a difficulty regarding staff retention. And again, I would like to assure the committee that the Directorate of Care and Rehabilitation are taking all possible steps to ensure that we can recruit a prison medical personnel on a permanent basis. I also share the concerns of members of this committee, let me say this readily, as far as the high numbers of prisoners with mental health issues and suffering mental health disorders. And I believe it's important that we do have available appropriate psychiatric services. This is an ongoing challenge, an ongoing programme of work here. But I do want to point, for example, the National Forensic Mental Health Services providing on an ongoing basis mental health services in prisons here in Dublin and also Midlands and Portlaoise Prison.
Okay,
current trends show approximately 250 prisoners weekly in receipt of services. Deputy Daly appears to have mentioned acute psychiatric issues and the relationship between the Central Mental Hospital and our prisons. Again, I believe it's important that both the prison services and the CMH would work together in order to ensure an appropriate level of service. Oftentimes, there are persons in prison who would benefit from a detention in a health institution rather than in a prison institution. We need to look at these on a case-by-case basis.
I'm not going to open a discussion on it, but I mean, we have a crisis in this regard, and the continuing of it is going to result in more assaults on staff and probably deaths in relation to prisoners and that as well who need help. And there is a problem. If we've sanctioned the recruitment of forensic psychiatrists for years now and we haven't got them, there's a bigger problem here, but we'll return to it maybe again. Yeah.
Chair, just I want to know, like, we've had the therapeutic communities within the prison service has been discussed kind of at a policy level for quite a time now. I know Caoimhghín, who operate a very successful recovery approach, sometimes within someone's sentence and where there's cooperation between themselves and the prison service. Has there been any political decision made to actually fund or pilot therapeutic communities which work really well in the UK? And I think warrant kind of a proactive policy approach here, because as we all know, every prison has a complex history, and I think unless we properly fund, and it's not just a headline about educational services or acute intervention, which are important, but I think it's the pathway out of prison that prevents the recidivism and all the difficulties we see. So, are you considering that, and would you agree that to potentially pilot it or fund it? And that's something that is within your jurisdiction, because it has been discussed, but we haven't had anything substantive kind of agreed or announced about trying it. I think if we do, it'll work well. I think we'll help the prison population and we'll help the broader communities that we all live in if we try it out.
Chambers. Minister, please.
Yeah, I would agree with the importance of what Deputy Chambers has said, and I do believe the prison service, in conjunction with the private sector, and indeed with some public sector agencies, are always looking to what might be regarded as best practice in terms of ensuring aftercare for prisoners, and ensuring that people within prison, before they are released, are encouraged to engage in possible integration programmes. There's a challenge as far as housing is concerned, a challenge as far as employment is concerned. But there are various agencies, voluntary agencies, and some agencies in the private sector who are providing funding in order to ensure that prisoners are prepared for a return into the community. I don't have actual figures of prisoners who have benefited from those, but I would be happy to provide those to the deputies.
Specifically on what I was referring to was the establishment of or piloting a therapeutic community within a prison. So actually taking a wing of a prison where it's run like a therapeutic community, run by prisoners actually. It works really well in the UK and other countries. Fantastic outcomes for prisoners and for the general population and for communities. And we're not doing it. We're funding kind of siloed educational interventions or health interventions, but we're not looking at this in a holistic way. It's not about funding some of the aftercare packages, and Caoimhghín and others do that, but the likes of Caoimhghín have been contacting your department on a regular basis to look for a policy decision around the establishment of a therapeutic community within the prison system. And I think you should engage with the prison service to try and do it, because I think it'll be a positive legacy for you in the Department of Justice actually to have been the person to do this. I think we'll see it rolled out across the board. So I just specifically on that, I'd ask you to look at it.
Respond briefly.
Yeah, well, I'm not really sure of the UK proposition to which the deputy refers, but I have to say, in terms of prison policy, I wouldn't be looking to the UK in terms of best practice as far as prisons are concerned, but I'd certainly take on board what the deputy has said in terms of the provision of in-service programmes, be they in the area of health and education, and there are many of them right throughout our prisons. And again, I would point to the recently opened violent prisoner unit in Portlaoise, which again draws from expertise not only in the justice sector but right across through the health sector in terms of psychiatric support and ongoing psychological monitoring and health services. So this is an ongoing programme of work, and any specific programme that Deputy Chambers would like the prison service to have a look at, I'm sure they would be open to it.
Okay. Chair, I'd just say you can ask the Taoiseach. He regularly visits Caoimhghín in our own constituency in Dublin West. He's very much for therapeutic communities, and I think you should talk to him. I'm not talking about the general prison model, but therapeutic communities work well in the UK and other countries, and I think I've put in parliamentary questions on this. I'm surprised you're not aware of it, but I'm not talking about specific programmes. It's about the general proposition, but I'll leave it there.
Deputy, you could follow up with a correspondence directly with the Minister.
I have actually, and I've written many times.
All right, fair enough. Well, the Minister should note the Deputy's concerns, his proposal, and see if there's any prospects in that regard. Deputy Jim O'Callaghan.
We'll be happy to do so.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you.
I actually don't have a question. I just want to make a comment that I welcome the increase in funding for educational services within prisons, and I think that, combined with Jack's proposal, could have a very positive impact. But we've got to get drugs out of prisons, and I know it's difficult, but try to get education and training in. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, that concludes address of vote 21 in relation to prisons. We'll now move on to vote 22, the court service, and I invite questions from from members on this vote. Deputy O'Callaghan, please.
Mr. We've been going through hearings on the reform of the family law system, and one of the big issues raised by very many witnesses is that we need proper family law courts in terms of the physical structure of them. I know that Hammond Lane, I think, had been identified as suitable for family law courts. What's happening there? Is that going to go ahead? Are we going to get a specified and dedicated family law court centre in Dublin?
Is that your only question, Deputy, on this issue? Right. Minister.
Yeah, I'm very keen that positive progress be reported on the Hammond Lane venture. I acknowledge that there are particular challenges in the administration of family law in our courts, not only in terms of infrastructure but also in terms of management. On the matter of infrastructure, I have a sum of money available to the order of €80 million. We have a vacant site. There are ongoing discussions between the appropriate stakeholders, my department, the court services, the National Development Finance Agency. I want to see real progress on the Hammond Lane family law project this year.
Okay, Minister, thank you. And thank you, Deputy O'Callaghan. There are no other members showing in relation to the court service, so I propose that we close address of vote 22 and move on to vote 24, which is justice and equality. Now, this vote is made up of a number of different programmes, as members will have already noted, and I invite questions from members on this vote. Justice and equality. Deputy Clare Daly.
And as you say, Chair, this is a big area, and I suppose I have most of my questions for this group. I'll maybe see how we get on taking them together, but, you know, look, the first one is just on the Inspector of Prisons. I notice a reduction, quite a substantial reduction in her budget for this year, and I'm wondering what's going on in that regard. I mean, we have a situation now where the Inspector of Prisons has a smaller budget than the Irish Film Classification Office. And given that we've no prisoner complaint mechanism, this is an incredibly important role. So I'm wondering why you've reduced her budget to under 500,000, which is a really small amount of money, yet you've allocated 251,000 to the Judicial Appointments Commission and the Judicial Council, neither of which has actually been set up yet, which makes it, to me, doubly insulting. And when you think of the amount of groups who've called for extra resources for the Inspector of Prisons, when in particular the recent investigation which she undertook into alleged unauthorised surveillance of prisoners, there was a call then of prison staff, there was a call then for her to be given extra resources to carry out that report. Now, I know from a PQ that she's finished the report. Are you going to publish it? When are we going to see it? Has it been sent to the Data Protection Commission? And did she get extra resources for that? And what's the reason for the budget drop? Now, I have a number of questions for other areas, but that's my only one, Sunday.
We'll take that quickly and we'll move on. And with members' cooperation is that we don't want to be here all day.
I want to acknowledge the importance of the role of the Inspector of Prisons, and in particular I want to welcome the appointment of the new Inspector, Dr. Patricia Gilheany. And I am concerned to ensure that her office is in a position to run effectively and efficiently. In fact, I intend meeting her over the next couple of weeks in order to discuss many of the issues that have been raised here. On the matter of the report that she has recently undertaken, I've received a copy. I have forwarded to the Attorney General, which is normal practice with such reports, and I'll make a decision regarding publication once I receive a copy back. And yes, the Inspector was provided with a level of resources in order to ensure that that report could be carried out within a particular time frame. The budget for the Office of the Inspector in 2018 was 391,000. This year, the revised estimate is 496,000, an increase of €100,000. There was an increase in the supplementary estimate in the end of last year to the order of €172,000. But I accept Deputy Daly's point that the office does need to be resourced, and as I say, I have arranged to meet the current inspector, which meeting will take place shortly.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy.
I won't labour. My understanding was the budget for last year, the total budget was 563,000 and it went down to 496,000, which, but if the Minister is saying that's wrong, I'll have to go back and look at my figures again, because it's clearly shown to me that there has been a reduction there, so I don't know how we can give extra resources if we're cutting the budget.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if Deputy Daly bore in mind the 172,000 for the office in the supplementary estimate.
Okay, we can go back and look at that. Just while we're on the prison, I had a recent parliamentary question in relation to UPCAT, and you told me that the draft legislation is nearly complete. Has any money been set aside in terms for UPCAT ratification? I mean, you know, if we're getting money set aside for a Judicial Appointments Commission that hasn't even been authorised yet, they're getting a couple of 100,000. Is there anything set aside for UPCAT? And maybe add on another question and go briefly into another area then.
We'll take this one out of the way.
Yeah.
Look, I appreciate it's a compendium.
I know.
Vote 24. We'll do our best. Minister, have you a response?
Yeah, I don't have a figure for a specific designation in respect of UPCAT, but I do know that the report that we received takes account of the inspector engaging with UPCAT. But I'll provide you a note just on the matter of funding.
If you come back to us
Yeah.
on it, but if you could add in, I suppose what I'm looking to know is, has any money been ring-fenced for independent coordinated inspection bodies of places of detention? Is there any money set aside for that this year's budget in an extra way? So maybe if you could come back to us on that. Just briefly, Chair.
Maybe reflected in the current budget, but I'll drop you a specific note on that.
On the, yeah, for the extension of that.
Would you address it to the clerk as well, please?
I will.
That would be good. Just then, in terms of Inish, obviously there's been, I think, an underspend in Inish over the last number of years as a result of the difficulties with recruitment. And I suppose what I'm looking for here is, can the Minister provide any update regarding staffing levels? Are they still understaffed? If they are, why is it proven so difficult to recruit people? Obviously there's incredibly long delays in the system, which is soul destroying for the individuals concerned and incredibly stressful for them and their families, and it really needs to be fixed. So I suppose if the Minister can give us some update regarding the backlogs in visa applications over the past number of years, citizenship applications and asylum applications, that would be helpful. And in that context as well, just with regard to direct provision, I mean, there is talk, I believe, of closing Hatch Hall in Dublin. I believe the residents living there have been told they need to be out by the end of the year. There's other plans afoot for that building. What are the plans to accommodate people presently there, and the overall direct provision programme that's underway?
Is that your last question?
I've one small other one
Would
on
you add
another
it?
area, but we'll take this one first. Or do you want me to? Well, it's a different area. But
It's
I
a
don't
different
want to-
area.
yeah.
All right, we'll leave it that way. Minister, please.
Yeah, well, on the matter of the staff at Inish, I have to say the challenges there arose from a successful recovery in terms of our economic fortunes. That it was a challenge in respect of recruiting people. However, I am pleased to say that the backlogs are being addressed by dint of new staff that has been recruited, notwithstanding the challenges. At the end of 2017, we were under 800, some 793. That had increased to 818 at the end of 2018. It's not so much a resource problem as a recruitment problem, but I am conscious of the issues, and we are working towards ensuring that the application process is dealt with as speedily and as effectively as possible. As far as the general direct provision is concerned, again, members of this committee will be more aware than most of the challenge involved here. I don't have a huge menu in terms of options. It would appear that the long-term future of Hatch Hall is now under question, having regard to a likely change of use, and that will present a challenge. But the authorities and my department are open accepting offers of appropriate accommodation in order to meet the capacity needs. We recently again commenced a public procurement exercise seeking public tenders for the revision of accommodation, not only in Dublin but throughout the country. However, I wish to assure members that this process will continue. A series of regional engagements, and again, I'm open to suggestions that members of this committee, on an individual basis, or indeed this committee itself, might take a view as far as how best we might manage direct provision. But we have a significant number of people in emergency accommodation. We have our own national obligations, which I'm conscious of. We have international obligations. Again, in recent times, a request from EU colleagues in respect of emergency engagements in the Mediterranean, which will continue to present challenges to us in terms of the provision of appropriate and suitable accommodation.
Thank you, Minister.
This is frightening in some ways, and I know a number of the individuals living in Hatch Hall who are really worried about what this means for them, and we have the prospect of hundreds of people now being dispersed to where? There's nowhere really for them, because that's been turned into a luxury hotel, I believe, which is really unfortunate, to put it mildly, as best I can. But I mean, a number of those people living there are people who have their papers, they're allowed to stay here, but there's no accommodation for them. People who came here as youngsters, unaccompanied minors, who want to carry on their studies and so on. They're doing their leave insert there, and they don't know where they're going to be going. So this is a really serious. I mean, I think it probably is. We're looking at it for our work programme in the run into the summer, and I think we do need a deeper conversation. But just before I ask my last question, on the staffing problems in Inish, is it the case there does seem to be, and the Minister says the delays are being dealt with? Not really sure about that one, to be honest with you. Particularly, I'm dealing with cases of people whose asylum applications, there seems to be considerable backlogs with people getting their minister's letters. Is part of this function of the checking in the issuing of the minister's letter linked to some function that's outsourced and some block in the system there? Because there does seem to be delays when people are in that system to get their clearance and their status here. But the last question was really in relation to Forensic Science Ireland and the €10 million that's been cut from its budget because of the National Children's Hospital. And I raise it in the context that the figures produced at the end of last year, that there were approximately 70 sexual assault and rape cases waiting on the examination kit being processed, and the demands being put on that service, which we were told were going to be alleviated by the move to Kildare and the recruitment of 24 people. How does that tally like with a cut of 10 million? Why were these particularly axed? And I mean, particularly in the context of the delays of rape and sexual assault cases, which can take over a year, which is absolutely outrageous to progress cases like that. So how does this fit in with the promise to deal with improvements in dealing with sexual crime and so on? Are we going to recruit those people? What does the move to Kildare move? And it obviously ties in with the previous question by Deputy O'Callaghan about the Garda versus civilian staff there as well.
Thank you, Deputy Daly. Minister, last response to Deputy Daly, please.
Just very briefly, in respect of the Reception Integration Agency, I want to impress on the committee that RIA continues to work in order to expand its capacity, both within existing centres and also with the identification of new premises throughout the country. As far as the case in point on Hatch Hall is concerned, I would point to the fact that the appropriate agencies will seek to have a resolution to this issue. We had a similar type challenge in Clondalkin, which was met by means of dialogue, by people sitting round the table and ensuring that the sensitive issues can be dealt with by a compassionate means, rather than people inducing a form of fear or panic. As far as processing times are concerned, there have been improvements here, and we will continue to strive for a greater level of effectiveness. 4 months is now the processing time in respect of priority cases, 8 to 10 months for non-priority cases, and decisions will issue within a period of 8 weeks from the interview. Now, obviously, there are some complex individual cases that do from time to time take longer, but I'm very conscious of the need to have a streamlined system and that people can have an element of certainty in respect of the time, frame involved. On the matter of the forensic science, well, again, I would acknowledge progress on the site there and the urgent need to move from Phoenix Park out to Back Weston, and the provision of funding is there for that. There is no impact on any of the current building programme on any issue pertaining to the National Children's Hospital. In fact, the sum of €10 million that was involved in the reprofiling were not funds that could have been spent this year on the capital programme in any event.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Thank you, Deputy Daly. Deputy Jim O'Callaghan to be followed by Deputy Donegal O'Leary and Deputy Colm Brophy.
You have 3 questions, Minister. First, in respect of the Garda Ombudsman Commission, you'll be aware that a number of years ago they were looking for an increase in resources in order that they'd have more investigators. I'm just wondering, is the 10% increase a recognition that what they were seeking was legitimate and it has been granted? That's the first question. Second question relates to the equivalence being accorded by the estimates between the Judicial Appointments Commission and the Judicial Council. As you're probably all too far aware, the Judicial Appointments Commission's responsibility is to recommend to government about 15 people each year for appointment to the bench. The function of the Judicial Council will be to train the country's over 100 judges, to discipline judges who get into problems or against whom complaints are made, and for judges to issue guidelines such as in respect of personal injuries. It's a much more substantial body of work than the body of work required by the Judicial Appointments Commission. So I'm going to just ask you to explain what's the reason for the equivalence. Do you not recognise that the Council is going to be carrying out much more detailed and extensive work? And thirdly, Forensic Science Ireland. But my understanding is that at present, small amounts of drugs which are seized, that the resources aren't there within Forensic Science Ireland for them to be tested. And in effect, people who have drugs seized, often small amounts of drugs, there's no prospect of them being prosecuted in respect of it. So are there going to be resources allocated to Forensic Science Ireland to such an extent that they'll be able to test for a small amount of drugs which have been seized?
Thank you, Deputy Minister, please.
Yes, well, I would hope that Forensic Science Ireland would be able to engage in the type of work that it's mandated to do, and that does involve the type of work as per the example of Deputy O'Caoláin. But the priority is to ensure that the elaborate and exciting capital project can continue with the opening in 2 years' time of the new centre at Back Weston. As far as GSOC is concerned, I want to acknowledge the increased allocation of funding to facilitate recruitment of staff, and I understand 42 new staff are currently being recruited, some in situ, and of course members of this committee will be aware of the legislative programme as a consequence of the report of the Commission on Future Policing, that again appropriate progress has been made in that regard, and that will involve a greater level of independence to the newly constructed police complaints body. And again, this is something that will occur over the course of the next 18 months or so. On the matter of the Judicial Council versus the Appointments Commission, I have to say that the monies indicated in the estimate are merely indicators. Obviously, there are timeframes involved here. It's unlikely that the mechanics of the Judicial Appointments Commission will be in place in their entirety this year. However, I'm very keen to make progress on the matter of the Judicial Council. So the funding is merely indicative, in many respects reflective of start-up, but will be reviewed from time to time.
Okay. You've covered all of the matters raised. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Donegal-Leary, please.
Yeah, I suppose I didn't come in there earlier in relation to the Hammond Lane, but I fully support this in relation to that being one of the main issues that came up in our recent hearings on family law. But one of the other issues that came up from absolutely every speaker, and it's not the only area certainly, was the difficulty in getting legal aid and the, I suppose, very low thresholds that people had, the high minimum contributions that people have to pay. And it's a problem in several areas, but I think particularly in family law. And my reading of the situation is that the Legal Aid Board's funding is more or less static, and indeed criminal legal aid funding is being reduced. Now, perhaps it's politically, I don't know, it's perhaps not the most popular issue or whatever, but I still think it's a seriously retrograde step, and I think that the backlogs that exist for legal aid, the minimum contribution that can put people off, all this is creating a real issue when it comes to access to justice for people, and I think justice is becoming inaccessible for many people.
Okay, Deputy Minister, please.
These are demand-led schemes. As far as the Civil Legal Aid and the Legal Aid Board is concerned, I think it's something in the region of €50 million. Very keen to ensure that the spread of centres around the country for the provision of legal aid, that the minimum waiting periods are tackled. And again, I would point to progress made in that regard, particularly over the last 12 to 18 months. And again, we are engaged in an ongoing review with the Legal Aid Board. I'm very anxious to proceed with the Hammond Lane, but also I'm very keen to ensure from a legislative point of view that we can ensure that our family law structures are more streamlined. I accept that in parts of the country that's a particular challenge in terms of waiting for cases to be heard, or indeed cases partly heard and not complete. These are issues that I am discussing with both the court services and the judiciary, and I would hope to be in a position shortly over the next few weeks to bring the general scheme of a bill to government that will set up a family law unit within the current court regime, and I believe it's important that family law cases are dealt with by specially trained and expert family judges, and that we discontinue what is an unacceptable practice currently, where family law cases are from time to time dealt with on the same day as criminal cases or civil law cases or licensing cases or whatever. Current funding for the Legal Aid Board, €40 million. Additional resources in recent years, including €3 million for legal advice on the Walia scheme, which is a benefit to persons dealing with challenges in their family homes. But again, I'm in ongoing contact with the appropriate agencies here, and very keen that the new Hammond Lane Family and Child Law Centre will be a flagship for family law throughout the country.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy O'Leary, have you further?
I do. Just, I suppose, briefly, I suppose there's some commentary there at the minute in relation to, correctly, I suppose, increasingly there is a worrying trend in relation to to sexual crimes and sexual violences and reporting of same. I wish to ask the funding for the Rape Crisis Network, which I suppose provides support for the various rape crisis centres, is very, very modest. And I wonder I think it's under 100,000, I think, if that has been considered for any increases, and more generally whether rape crisis centres, whether there is a proposal to increase funding. I suppose just ask, does the Attorney General's office fall within this head, or is that, no? Does it fall within any justice head? Is it separate? No.
Minister, can you clarify that position, please?
Yeah, well, I understand that much of the funding for many of the advocacy organisations come from my colleague, Minister for Children and Youth Affairs, Minister Zapone. I understand that she's making an announcement this morning in that regard. But I keep in very close contact with all the advocacy groups, and I want to acknowledge their assistance in terms of ensuring that there is an appropriate information campaign on what is the new regime now as far as sexual violence, domestic violence in particular is concerned, and our obligations, having regard to the fact that we recently ratified the Istanbul Convention. And yes, there will be ongoing resource issues in terms of the Garda Síochána, in terms of ensuring, for example, that victims' organisations are properly and adequately funded. Again, I would acknowledge the work of this committee in that regard, ensuring that we have a climate of zero tolerance in this country towards any form of domestic or sexual violence.
Thanks, Minister. Deputy, you're okay? You've covered the issue you wanted to address.
I did, but I'm not sure that the Minister is. I'm not sure the Minister is correct. I think that's justice. I always thought it was justice to provide that funding. I don't.
Well, look at that.
I'd like the Minister to clarify that, but I may be mistaken now. But my understanding is that Rape Crisis Centres and Rape Crisis Network funding was Department of Justice.
No. My understanding is that the funding comes from TUSLA in that regard, and also that it's quite substantial, in excess of 25 million. And again, TUSLA's primary relationship with Minister Zapone. But again, these are issues that I would discuss on a regular basis with the advocacy groups and the rape crisis groups. Support services such as victims of crime, HSE is involved in a form of funding, but the main funding stream is from the Child and Family Agency.
That clarifies the matter. Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Colm Brophy, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just obviously to welcome and start by welcoming the range of increased funding that's contained in what we've been discussing this morning. It's very welcome right across the whole range of areas which you have talked about, Minister. I want to, though, specifically ask you about something which I have raised before, Innis and the funding for it. I appreciate you addressed some comments on it earlier on. I mean, the situation with the way in which Innis is processing visa applications, I have to be honest with you, Minister, I find totally unsatisfactory. I think there is inordinate delays right across the board, from fairly regular, mundane visa applications, I would say, right the way through to people looking to come into our country to stay. Some of it, I think, needs to be addressed through increased support and funding, but I want to take the opportunity to make the point to you that some of it, to me, just seems operationally to be an unacceptable way of delivering the service to the people who are using it. I've highlighted before, and I know I've highlighted to you directly, Minister, cases where people making very, very reasonable requests for visas for people, family members, say, to enter the country for short duration, have been left waiting months and months and months for an answer. And I'm wondering, within the allocation increase, which I think is about 11%, is that sufficiently going to address the problems that are there within us at the moment?
Okay, Deputy Brophy, thank you for that. Minister, please.
Yeah, well, I think it's important that we put this in context. And the context is that applications to the order of in excess of 250,000 per year are being dealt with by Inish. And members of this committee will be well aware of the diverse and varying functions of the body. But I'm very keen to ensure that any time frames are kept at a minimum. And of course, members will obviously agree that there is need for certain scrutiny. There is need for security issues, obviously, to be taken into account. But the increased staffing will allow for a greater throughput of cases in a shorter time frame. I want to acknowledge the importance of the service improvement plan, and that's the title of the document, which is an indicative of an admission on the part of the group that yes, improvements could be made. I'm not sure if your committee had an opportunity to discuss that plan in detail, but it might be worthwhile. In the meantime, I wish to assure you a further investment, for example, in technology, increased staffing numbers, and a customer-focused disposition on the part of everybody there to ensure that the service is efficient and effective.
Thank you, Minister. Okay, Deputy Brophy, or did you want to?
You know, I'll thank the Minister for that. Just to say, I do welcome that, and I welcome your comments, Minister. We did have an opportunity to engage with them as a committee, but I do feel that there still is, even after that, and I hope now we'll start to see the results come through, because some of the situations that I deal with in terms of constituents contacting me are absolutely unacceptable in terms of the delays which they've been put through. And again, as I say, it's not because there's something particularly difficult or there's something particularly problematic. These are very, very ordinary applications that are being processed by neighbouring jurisdictions within a matter of weeks, and we are taking months and months and months to process them. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for your answer.
I just by way of concluding comment, I want to acknowledge the hard work and dedication, and indeed the leadership within Inish. Of course, realising that there are challenges, but pointing, for example, to the setting up of a change management unit within Inish, which is delivering reform. And again, I think it might be worthwhile after the summer, perhaps, that you would have an opportunity of engaging and just to see and hear firsthand from the management in Inish as to A, the nature of the challenge, but B, and equally as important, the manner in which that challenge is being addressed by increased investment and changes in management structures in order to deliver a high level of service to the customers.
Your remarks and urgings are noted, Minister. Thank you for that. I thank the members for the cooperation in relation to vote 24, Justice and Equality, which now concludes. We move on to vote 25, the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, and I'd like to invite any questions, contributions from members as you indicate. No? We're okay in this respect in relation to vote 25. In that case, I propose to move on to the final of the 6 subheads, vote 41, the Policing Authority, and similarly I open the opportunity to members if there's anyone. Deputy O'Leary.
I suppose it's not so much financial, but it does relate to the Policing Authority, I suppose, is, look, I mean, obviously the Commission on the Future of Policing envisions significant structural change to the oversight bodies, presumably requires legislation, and I suppose maybe just to get an update from the Minister on the legislation required to bring that into effect. I probably won't agree with all of it, but still, it would be useful to have an update. As I have the opportunity as well, I suppose related to that, the Minister has had some commentary again relating to the Commission on the Future of Policing in relation to the appointments process for, I'm not sure the It was the Commissioner of Future Policing, it was the Strategic Threat Assessment Centre and Coordinator. I think you're considering maybe another title now, I think possibly. But will that require legislation, or will the Minister be doing that through, I don't know, some form of secondary legislation to establish that?
Okay, Deputy O'Leary, Minister, would you like to respond, please?
Thank you. Just in respect of the new legislative regime, the Policing and Community Safety Bill, we have an implementation plan for delivery on the recommendations in the report on the Commission of Future Policing. The expectation is that the general scheme of the new Policing and Community Safety Bill will be published by the end of Q3 of this year. That will allow, presumably, for its introduction, perhaps maybe early next year. But again, I will keep the committee informed of developments. And as far as the new body in respect of the security of the state, that will be under the remit, in the first instance, of the Department of Taoiseach, and that's where the implementation group for the overall body is. Again, I would be happy to keep the committee informed on the legislative requirements there. My understanding is from Taoiseach's office that it's not anticipated that the new security regime will require specific standalone legislation.
And just on supplementary to that, it may not require it, but I do believe if it's possible to bring forward some formal legislation, or if it's possible to bring forward to the Dáil the proposal for consideration, this is an important issue. It's a very significant change to policing and security arrangements in this jurisdiction, and I think it needs further oversight and discussion on the floor of the Dáil and the committee, perhaps.
I'm sure, Caoimhghín, if this committee would like to carry out a form of pre-regulatory scrutiny, maybe along the same lines as you would do pre-leg, I'd be happy to accommodate.
Okay, all right, Deputy O'Leary and Deputy Daly, you have nothing further to add in this instance. In that case, I believe we have completed address of the revised estimates for 2019, covering the 6 sections, votes 20, 21, 22, 24, 25 and 41. I would like to thank the Minister and his officials for assisting the committee with our consideration of the revised estimates. As we have now completed that consideration on votes 20, 21, 22, 24 and 41, the Clerk will send a message to that effect to the Clerk of the Dáil in accordance with Standing Order 90. Under Standing Order 89.2, the message is deemed to be the report of the committee. Minister, just before we conclude, and just because I think it is only fair that I ask that you might note that there is a regular expression of disappointment and exasperation by members in regards to private members' bills. It came up again this morning. I'm only sharing this with you before we conclude. We received correspondence from you advising that there's ongoing consideration in relation to the money message, and that a decision in relation to this matter will issue after a memorandum is brought to government's attention. The regularity of this and the effect of it in terms of kicking specific private members' legislation, non-government legislation, down the road is causing significant vexation here in the Justice and Equality Committee, and there was quite a substantial expression of that here at the earlier meeting this morning. I'm bringing that to your attention as this is the first opportunity I have to do so, and I would ask that a more a favourable and well-disposed disposition be adopted in relation to private members' bills, as we demonstrate towards all government legislation that you request address of expeditiously most often, and which we continue to schedule in line with your requests. So I think that that's summing up the situation.
Well, I take it the imminent departure of members means you don't want me to reply.
Well, I wasn't putting you on the spot to do a reply. I was
That's
really.
fine. No, I merely.
But if you can and if you will, please.
I merely say that we have currently 50 justice and equality private members' bills, 11 of them currently requiring a memo to government on the matter of a money message. But I would be really keen to engage in a positive way with this committee, notwithstanding the challenge I have. If I have 50 private members' bills, I have in excess of 50 government bills, a programme for government commitments, on my desk. I think a total of 117 bills. Out of those, many have been approved by this committee. But I'm very keen to work with you, Caoimhghín, and members. You used the word exasperation. It would trouble me if members of this committee are in a state of exasperation with government. So let me see what I can do to assist.
Well, I haven't exaggerated. I have reflected accurately.
Absolutely.
So can I say, I think with the concluding remark that respect and cooperation is a two-way street. You will have ours, but we would appreciate yours in turn. The Select Committee is adjourned sine die. Caoimhghín.